evaluators are human,
Right.
and they can form opinions, but I think their opinions have to be very mindful of any pre-existing biases.
I was going to say, let's talk about that, because the idea that a child custody evaluator is not impacted by his or her own experiences, maybe unresolved issues, maybe things that they've experienced growing up and they said, I'm never going to let this happen, or maybe they found themselves, they have developed a sense that somehow they are a victim, and now they're going to advocate for victims, and they're going to find people that are victimizers when they're not victimizers at all. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you talk about the kind of triggers of grinding an axe, I think is what you're kind of, something about your own previous history, that when you run across the portrayal of something that could be a trigger, kind of triggers your own stuff, and then you're contributing to not wanting that to happen. So, when you run across, let's say hypothetically, if you're running across somebody that is good at portraying themselves as a victim, okay, and triggering sympathy, and you already have this previous history,
Right.
where you may have already, dealt with deception or, dealt with your own trauma, then what you're running across in your patient or your subject triggers your own stuff, and you feel like you got to defend, not let that happen.
So, I also think, too, that there ought to be, perhaps even among these child custody evaluators, some type of psychological testing done for them.
Well, it's
on a regular basis.
There was such a multitude of false statements that cannot be substantiated, even when the documentation was submitted, that you wonder, okay, was this just negligence? Was this done on purpose, or was there a certain level of incompetence? Which one was it? But you almost wonder, how did this occur? Because it was such a multitude. And there were instances of parental conflict, but the way it was presented in the report wasn't in the same context that the documentation shows. So let's say, you look at, part of discovery, you look at all the blogs, produced by Alyssa Sherry in terms of, what she says about being a feminist, her kind of view about males, her blogs about, growing up being deceived by her dad, her blogs about, the alcohol problem with her mom, the blogs where she talks about main theme of males being predators toward females, but you don't see one blog about how females can be predator toward males.
Right.
So where is all that coming from? And how does it impact an evaluation?
And that's a very good point. Yesterday I was in Austin and I listened to some testimony regarding protective orders. And even though there was given the statement, well, it's not just a protective order that we're going to protect women from abuse of men or something like that, but all the testimony related to protecting women against abuse of men. And when I got up there, I wasn't an invited testimony or anything like that. But I said, have we forgotten about the Amber Heard case? Because it's hard to, you don't want to just take one case and just generalize everything, but there are studies that have been done that showed exactly what you've said, that, it goes both ways. And in a situation like with Alyssa Sherry, all men are victimizers, all women are victims, more or less a Duluth model, and there are child custody evaluators mentality or guiding principles. Something is definitely not right there. The objectivity that and the impartiality that she should be having is compromised severely based upon the blogs and the stuff that she's written, from what I'm hearing you say.
Well, yeah, and I think the other thing, it's an opinion that's been formed by other experts in evaluating her reports. And that, I think, is part of the downfall of what I would say is judicial discretion. Because in the Texas Family Code and the TAC Code, it's very important that forensic psychologists practice according to the standards of the licensing board. And standards of care of a licensing board also depend upon what really goes on in the field in that particular subspecialty. So what would other forensic psychologists or forensic psychiatrists be doing? And several of them have evaluated these reports and have said that there's significant bias in reports of other cases, including mine. And there's significant lack of validation, there's significant lack of substantiation of opinions, and that the opinions about my psychological structure are not validated by the psychological testing, nor by my developmental history.
So with all of these things, all of these people that are talking about Alyssa Sherry and what you just mentioned, how is she even recognized as an expert? How did she become recognized as an expert? I mean, that, to me, that immediately raises the question: how is it that she gets relied upon, and that attorneys say, "Hey, we're going to go to Alyssa Sherry because she's the expert in this field"? How did this happen?
That would be based purely on speculation on my part. Is probably I would imagine others would speculate.
Right.
You know, I think, you know, factually speaking, when you're in a community for a long time and you're in a certain role,
And you schmooze with people.
well, I mean,
Possibly.
even in her, you know, legal consensus paperwork, she mentions that, you know, she or her or members of her clinic may socially interact with other members of the legal profession. Again, on speculation, you can practice to do anything and say you're an expert in the field.
Right.
You know, but one notable thing is if you're going to claim to be an expert in a field, you have to practice according to those standards of those experts.
Yeah.
So if I'm saying I'm an expert in child attachment, okay, I would have to practice by the standards of people that are experts in child attachment, which means in order to fully assess the child-parent relationship attachment, I would do attachment essays, which were done by another expert. And, you know, one was done that was age appropriate for our child, one was done with me and the child. And Alyssa Sherry did not do that. Now, Alyssa Sherry uses the reason because surreptitiously, I think her words were, a video recording the visit. Well, that's a lie, because there was no video recording of any visits, and even if there were, it would be within my legal right to do so. And if you're in a profession where you are interfacing psychiatry and law, then it would be a reasonable thing for that practitioner to do. As a matter of fact, I've talked with a professional forensic psychologist who, in her consent forms, there's a consent form that if the examinee would like things videotaped, there's a consent to do that. I mean, and so the reason of, oh, I didn't do a parent-child interactional interview, or I didn't do one because I was, you know, having this opinion that possibly it would be video recorded, well, that's not a valid reason.
Right. I would think that as a professional in the field that you're talking about right now, you would want to have the videotape. And I think it's only reasonable then at the same time that the person who's going through it should have a videotape as well. I mean,
why would there be caution about having a videotape interview in a forensic interview? I mean, unless the, you know, the other factors, you know, would it affect the child? Okay. Now that I could see there could be consideration. You know, and there were other statements.
But it's just to also check the veracity. I mean, so with videotaping, I think that number one, if you're a professional, your opinions, whatever, your conclusions could be questioned. And if you could have, hey, this is what I've done, here's the reason why. People that are professionals in the field could say that was a logical conclusion. But the other thing, you know, so it's for the validation of what you're saying, but I also think too for protection. I mean, what happens if you're in a place and then you've said, well, Dr. Alyssa Sherry sexually assaulted me. She goes, wait a minute, I didn't do such a thing, even though men get accused of that all the time, right? You know, here's the videotape. Show me where I sexually assaulted him.
Right. So I think the central theme is that, you know, the reasons used for not doing an appropriate parent-child interactional interviews that are balanced, which is required, are not significant to have prevented that, nor were they inquired about.